Some outboards you remember because they got you home, others you remember because they almost made sure you didn't. On the showroom floor they all look the same, clean cowlings, big numbers, trusted badges. But here's the twist, buried under that shine are midsections that rot from the inside out, fuel systems that die the moment ethanol hits them, bargain brands with no parts support, and ex-rental workhorses that are completely worn out long before the decals start to fade. In this video we're breaking down the outboards most likely to become engines of pure regret in 2026, from legendary models with hidden corrosion issues to cheap off-brand 20 to 30 horsepower motors and high-hour fleet engines disguised as deals. By the end, you'll know which problem years, designs, and too-good-to-be-true listings can quietly drain your wallet and ruin your weekends, and how to spot them before you hook up the trailer. Number 10. Yamaha 4-stroke F225 horsepower outboard of the early 2000s era. Power, I'll be in proud now. When this engine arrived, it felt like proof that big 4-stroke power had finally grown up. Quiet offshore runs, better fuel economy, less smoke. For a few years, the Yamaha F225 4-stroke was the dream motor on countless center consoles and walkarounds. Owners bragged about long-range trips, long trolling days, and the simple comfort of hearing a deep 4-stroke hum instead of an old 2-stroke bark. The weakness was not obvious at first. Buried deep inside the midsection, the dry exhaust housing sat in a harsh environment, hot gases, salt spray, and constant thermal cycling. On paper, it looked acceptable, but in real daily use, especially in warm saltwater, that housing began to corrode from the inside out. The metal thinned, pathways opened where there should have been solid material. The damage stayed hidden until it suddenly was not. Owners noticed the signs in different ways, a strange exhaust note, a hiss where the cowling used to be quiet, a gradual change in operating temperature that the gauge could not quite explain. Then came the teardown estimates and with them, the sinking realization that the problem was not a simple gasket or sensor. Midsection work on a large 4-stroke is major surgery, and the bill matches. In 2026, these engines are long past their early years. Any F225 from that era has already lived a life, and whatever corrosion was going to start has had decades to grow. Some examples are still running well and those will keep their legends, but many others sit one bad season away from a repair that costs more than the engine is worth. That is the kind of surprise that leaves owners wishing they had checked the production year and done more homework before falling in love with a nameplate. Number 9. Yamaha F115 horsepower first-generation outboard. On the surface, the Yamaha F115 4-stroke looks like the safest mid-range choice possible. It wears a respected badge, it's found on countless 17 to 19-foot boats, and, later versions have excellent reputations. The trouble starts when you look at the earliest generation, built in the early 2000s, and talk to the mechanics who have opened them up. Head gasket failures began showing up long before some owners expected them, a bit of coolant where it should not be, a hint of white vapor on startup that was too easily blamed on cool air, gradually soft compression in a cylinder that still seemed to be doing its job. None of these symptoms were dramatic on their own, which made them easy to ignore until the engine crossed a line and suddenly demanded real money. The fuel system added its own flavor of trouble. Early injectors and pumps were, a lot less tolerant of contaminated fuel and those ethanol blends. Sometimes, all it took was a tank that had sat too long, or maybe a bit of water sneaking past a filter, or, a load of fuel from a marginal gas dock. For some engines, that was all it took to create hesitation at mid-range, stumbling under acceleration, or a hunting idle that never quite settled down. Owners swapped filters, cleaned lines, and replaced parts in a slow, expensive process of elimination. In 2026, the first-generation F115 engines are well into the stage where all of those early design compromises show up more frequently. The motors can be kept alive and honestly, some run beautifully, but they often demand more patience and more money than their later descendants. Anyone shopping used because they heard Yamaha F115 is a reliable classic might end up discovering that not all production years are created equal. That realization, coming after the papers are signed, is where the regret sets in. Number 8. Mercury 115 horsepower electronic fuel-injected four-stroke of the mid-2000s. Dodrieston nux, or der, Berdenand. This engine, became the default choice on a huge number of freshwater boats, pontoons towing kids on tubes, aluminum fishing rigs crossing windy reservoirs, and family boats doing a little of everything all relied on it. On a test drive, the Mercury 115 four-stroke, with electronic fuel injection, really seemed like a solid bet, smooth, quiet, and strong enough to move most mid-size hulls without complaint. The trouble, honestly, lived inside the fuel supply module. That compact unit, tucked away and mostly ignored, had to handle fuel delivery, pressure regulation, and filtration while baking in engine room heat. Over time, pumps weakened, regulators drifted, and small internal filters clogged. The symptoms were, infuriatingly inconsistent. Sometimes the motor would surge past mid-range without a hiccup. Other times, it would stumble as soon as the throttle climbed much above a lazy cruise. Owners learned to dread a familiar pattern. The boat would run perfectly one day. The next day, on nearly identical water, the motor would refuse to rev past a certain point, triggering alarms and protests. Back at the dock or on the trailer with a garden hose, it would idle happily and tease everyone into thinking the problem had vanished. Diagnosing this kind of intermittent failure is slow and expensive. Some mechanics replaced only the suspect internal pump, while others recommended swapping the entire module to avoid chasing related issues. And because the engine is common, the number of do-it-yourself fix attempts in the used market is high. By 2026, many of these motors have a history that includes partial repairs, improvised fixes, and uncertain fuel system integrity. For a buyer who simply wants reliable mid-range power on a family boat, stepping into that history without understanding it is a quick path to frustration. The name sounds safe, but the real-world record is more complicated. That gap between expectation and reality is where regret tends to live. If you're thinking about an engine and wondering, does this one have a hidden problem? Drop it in the comments. I'll respond where I can, and there's a good chance someone else has already been there. Real stories and questions make this guide stronger, and your input might help someone dodge the exact mistake you saw coming. And if this breakdown is helping you think twice before buying, tap that like button and subscribe. It lets me know this kind of guide is worth continuing. Number 7. 150 horsepower first-generation motor. For many boaters, the Yamaha F150 four-stroke is, the gold standard of mid-range power, and in its refined later form, it really does deserve that reputation. But the earliest production years told a more complicated story, one that revolves around the balance shafts hidden inside the block. Those shafts spin opposite the crankshaft, canceling out vibration and creating that famously smooth feel at cruise. When the system works, you just, forget it exists. But when it wears out, you really cannot think about anything else. Worn bearings, misalignment, or failure inside the balance shaft assembly can turn a pleasant hum into a sharp metallic clatter that sends a chill through even the most relaxed captain. The repair demands real labor. The engine must be opened up deeply enough to reach components that were never meant to be replaced casually. Some owners catch the issue early and fix it before collateral damage spreads. Others do not notice until more parts have been stressed than just the shafts themselves. Fuel system components on the early versions added another point of vulnerability. Weak high-pressure pumps and aging sensors caused occasional stalling, starting issues, and erratic performance. None of these failures, taken alone, are rare or unforgivable in the life of a marine engine. But their combination, along with the balance shaft problem, means a first-generation F-150 that has never had this work done carries an invisible question mark. By 2026, many of these engines are sitting right in the hour range where balance shaft and pump issues most often appear. For a buyer who only heard the praise for the F-150 and never learned to distinguish years and internal generations, that engine on the back of a good used boat might look like a guarantee. In reality, it might be a very expensive question waiting for an answer. Number 6. Mercury four-stroke, 40 to 60 horsepower electronic fuel injection family of the early production years. In theory, these engines were aimed squarely at the sweet spot of boating, not too big, not too small, enough power for small pontoons, john boats, light center consoles and utility rigs. Instead, early owners began reporting a specific set of behaviors. The engine would start easily and idle smoothly at the dock. Under gentle throttle, it would seem fine, but as soon as the boat was pushed harder,